And we are starting now with Anisha Anantpurkat, Marita Matar, and Gabriela Hernandez, who will be presenting their project, Sick of Periods, Let's Talk About Cycles. Anisha is a dancer and researcher from Bangalore, India. She is trained in Kathak and has mostly performed in India. Anisha has worked in dramaturgy, research, curation, and performance making. She is currently a MA student of Dance Anthropology and ethnochoreology, and her dissertation looks at the processes of queering Hungarian folk dance practices in Budapest, Hungary. And we will be seeing Anisha later on today as well. She is joined by Marita, who is currently finishing her degree in dance knowledge, practice, and heritage, a master's in dance anthropology. Marita is a Lebanese pole dancer whose researches are inspired by the work of activists, and this stems from both her work with Palestinian, Syrian, and Kurdish refugees, as well as her fieldwork with queer artists in Colombia. She also obtained her Modern Languages and Translation degree alongside her Modern Dance Training Diploma with Sarab Alternative Dance School. And last but not least, we have Anna, who is a Colombian psychologist who focuses on peace building and finding alternative ways to resolve conflicts due to the violent environment in her home country. She has added belly dance to her practice, exploring how performing arts can bring diverse people and collectives together. And as a master's student in dance anthropology, her final dissertation is focused on the use of the body in building memories during transnational performances within the context of forced displacement. So thank you to all three of you for being part of our conference today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for such a nice introduction. And I think we can start now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I kneeled on the floor of a dirty hostel's toilet and vomited for the first 2 hours of my period. I felt my uterus wanted to kill me, while my friends, feeling worried and impotent, brought me some tea and painkillers. This happened every month since I moved abroad. I talked to my doctor and she said it was not my period. It was actually the PMS, premenstrual syndrome, you know? But is there even something happening before and after bleeding? Also, talking to my therapist, she said it may be my body trying to throw out something that's repressed inside. Oh my God, wait, I may be gay, I thought. Since then, each time I feel nauseous in the beginning of my period, I talk to my uterus. We already know we're gay, you can calm down, and it stops.
They divided us into two groups, obviously. This was back in 2012 at my school back home in Byblos, Lebanon. Girls in one room and boys in another. I remember the general dominating atmosphere. How do we come back normally as if nothing happened? In this room, an intervener explained to us that as we grow up, we will bleed, which means our bodies will be able to reproduce. We took our teacher's suggestion and pretended to have watched a movie when we met the boys. I felt something I haven't before, the need to censor. The awareness class at my school made me feel shame, and I had to self-censor myself. Looking back at this awareness event at my school, organized, I can't but think about the disgusting knowledge I inherited about my cycles.
I went to my mother, sometime in my early teens, as she napped in her room. After months, I had finally mustered up the courage to ask her a question. I walked in with my underwear in hand and stood next to her. "What is this?" I pointed to the gooey fluid on it. "It's white discharge, Beta," she said. "It's normal." That was before my period, I think. We all have so many stories related to our cycles. And when we challenged ourselves to think outside of bleeding, we had many more.
Anna, you have to unmute.
Sorry about it. Our starting point was the fact that all of us had experiences and stories at the top of our mind, or buried in us that we felt the need to expose, especially for ourselves. As AFATs and Erasmus students, as we travel across the world, we have been thinking a lot about our well-being, especially since frequent travel has challenged our bodies in various ways. This has drawn attention to our hormonal cycles and how they affect our daily life, and the lack of consideration we give to such changes. Leading is a fraction of the entire experience, and one that many people do not have.
While it didn't seem so to us in the beginning, we often felt stuck as we tried to think about menstrual cycles as a whole. It was hard for us to move away from the blood-centric thinking, also because we ourselves have only started to give importance to and identify how we feel at other times in our cycles. Bleeding is the part of our cycles that we can identify. This is despite having apps and resources that now ask us to log symptoms throughout our cycles. And during our research, we also noticed that much work in museums, performances is done around bleeding, the taboos associated, and the activism required for equity. However, the same attention is not given to the experience of hormonal changes and cycles across ages and genders. We also noticed that we often had associations to sites as we narrated stories, and we unquestionably associated these experiences to our contexts.
We want to reclaim spaces that are deemed mundane as sites of heritage. Bedrooms, kitchens, toilets, gardens, nature, streets, classrooms, all hold special significance to how we understand and corporeally experience menstrual cycles. The savoir-faire around menstrual cycles is most often transmitted in these spaces, and this transmission influences a new generation's performativity and approaches around this topic. Thus, we decided that we would evoke these sites of heritage in the way we narrated in the stories. In doing so, we make visible and activate stories that are often stigmatized, invisibilized, given more importance, or considered unimportant. This know-how is often transmitted orally, and today perhaps through new books aimed for youth or social media. We wanted to highlight that we inherit mentalities, which are anchored in contexts. We learn actions, or one could say movements, associated with our cycles, menstruation, and their related objects. And this happens through how we interpret the explicit transmission and how we observe gendered actions.
The entire project aims to target themes of labor, actions that are carefully thought, repeated over time, observed, often gendered, improvisations or adaptations that are bound by boundaries imposed by our context. We want to highlight how these boundaries that appear to us as social norms can be reaffirmed, broken, or resituated based on our actions.
Therefore, we imagine this performance as a site-specific project that will take place in a house, in which one room will be dedicated to the screening of short ethnographic accounts in the form of cine tracts. The films are of people's experiences with endometriosis, PCOS, menopause, hormone replacement therapy. The live performance will happen in other spaces of the house. We want the performance to be interactive and immersive.
And this live performance will have two main components. The first one, which would be an interactive and immersive experience that focuses on bringing to the surface corporeal experiences related to the cycle. And the second would be a sharing session, the way we did in the beginning, of stories or reflections. And it focuses on the audience sharing their stories and reflections with us at the end of the performance.
We want to highlight the labor of learning these new actions and norms. We envision rendering this corporeal sensation through involving the audience in our performance by creating spaces where poses related to the cycle can be photographed. Our aim is to bring out themes of comfort in our bodies and surroundings, as well as the role of infrastructure in shaping how we feel and move in spaces.
We also envision using an immersive audio experience where dialogues and comments related to cycles are repeated. They can be things we say to ourselves, things that are said to us by medical professionals, families, friends, as well as things we have read. This archive can be added to by the audience member, and this highlights the medical social impact it has on us.
And finally, we want to work with an artist who can make a sculpture of a figure or body that highlights the somatic experiences of hormones through a light installation. We would like to place lights inside the sculpture in order to visualize or make visible these experiences that we considered incorporeal. And through this, we attempt to depict and make public individual, private, and often silenced somatic experiences.
We want the audience to be able to interact with this formless sculpture that represents the body as a way of allowing them to think about how they feel. The light installation will respond to the touch triggered by the audience as a way of visualizing the sensations on the sculpture. We aim at articulating these sensations through different approaches, which involve visual activity, drawing, and emphasizing care.
This project is still in process, so we're still in the process of thinking how to include movement in this performance. The idea is to get people to reflect on cycles as a whole and the importance of understanding these cycles for one's wellness. The performance was also born from conversations we had with other queer people about HRT, dysphoria, and the connection of our cycles with our mental health, not just physical. What we realized, so much of our understanding of our wellness is linked to if and how we listen to our bodies.
So as we said, our focus is really on internalizing somatic experiences and to ask people to reflect on those as well through our performance. Our aim is to involve the audience in thinking about the corporeality in their cycles. And as movers, we're very curious to know how you interpret your cycles in relationship to your movement. 3 ways we tried to bring this out in our ideation of our project is through highlighting movements and poses that we take up during our cycles. We do it through the light installation to bring to fore what we may feel and to bring to fore different ways of articulating these feelings as well, and also through sharing as groups.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing that. I have so many feelings. This is going to be TMI, but I feel like I'm in a really comfortable space. I am like in the process of getting diagnosed for PCOS, so I can really like appreciate all of this work. Thank you guys so much for doing the work. I'm going to continue with Eva. Please correct me if I pronounce your name wrong. Eva Marie Gonzalez Drusquis. Okay, good. So Eva is a musician, performer, and PhD student whose research investigates the relationship between transness, embodiment, and dance. They also write and perform music for synthesizer, piano, and voice. Catch them scoring filmmaker Kelechi Agwoncha's piece, Tether, or teaching gender studies in Southern California. I'll pass the floor to you.
Hi, thank you so much. It's a true pleasure to be here. The previous 2 presentations have been really fascinating and inspirational. So thank you so much for having me. I want to start by acknowledging a death that just occurred here in the United States. O'Shea Osira is a Black trans femme who was recently murdered while voguing in a Brooklyn gas station. In my talk, I think about transness and dance together, and I do not think it's a coincidence that this murder occurred after a joyous dance. I think it speaks to the power of thinking about transness and dance together. And when we think about the American settler colonialism project, part of that is chattel slavery, and O'Shea Sibley is living in that legacy. So part of decolonizing in the United States is the abolition of slavery and its after effects. So I wanted to begin by invoking his life and all queer and trans life and its vibrancy and its everydayness in our unsettled bodies and in our capacity to dance. Okay, I learned I was transgender in the back of a beginner ballet class. In retrospect, it's surprising that in ballet, with its rigid gender roles and very controlled gestures, I found it ripe for gender exploration or any sensation of freedom. But there I was performing a jeté, a small kick, and I felt that my body was transgender. Something about this kick, a crisp flick off the floor, and then a return of the foot, somewhere between the freedom of flight and the joy of homecoming, I understood that I was transgender. My body told me. And I wonder how long my body held this knowledge before I listened. I had begun taking ballet classes for fun in my late 20s. I had not really danced much before outside of a few childhood lessons, but yet a regular dance practice was shifting my relationship to my own body. I had this new sense of myself, of my proportions, of my contours, of my gestures. I received information about spaces and other bodies. This experience is challenging to put into words, which demonstrates a point. This knowledge is of the body and not of a linguistic framework provided by my mind. My body was contributing to my subjectivity in a way I had not noticed before. And the term I use to describe this is embodiment or being embodied. In Eurocentric traditions, the mind and body are seen as separate. And this is most notably articulated by René Descartes in 1641. He argued that the body is superfluous to thought and perception. The mind is the seat of reason, logic, and objectivity, all these qualities that are seen as superior to the passion and emotionality represented by the body. This false dichotomy of mind versus body, reason versus emotion, provides the foundations for colonial powers to colonize land and people, what they deemed a necessary taming of the illogical and unreasonable, a forcible intervention for the savage who could be saved by the enlightened colonizer. With such taming came the suppression of embodied cultural practices, including dance and ritual. Part of the violence of colonialism is the imposition of or dehumanizing exclusion from a racialized binary gender system. The categories of men and women were forced onto indigenous cultures whose actual gender practices are not legible within this framework. The gender roles associated with white man and white woman do not necessarily reflect the roles of colonized people. For example, Oyeronke Oyewumi in The Invention of Woman uses the lived experience of Yoruba people to assert that gender is not a central organizing principle of all epistemologies. Additionally, many colonized people had genders outside of or in between a binary, and these were made perverse and illegal under colonial rule. We see this in the instance of California Indian two-spirit individuals, a spiritual position that exceeds Western categories of lesbian or gay. Colonizing Spaniards systematically exterminated members of these genders through murder, renaming, corporal punishment, or social dislocation. And through these examples, we're reminded that part of the colonial project is the subjection to a binary gender system and a set of expected gender norms that reflect upper-class white European ideals. Through this, we can start to speculate what decolonial possibilities exist within a body that disobeys the totalizing structure of the Western gender binary, and within a person that has repaired this mind-body split. What decolonial possibilities exist for the body that dances? I want to be clear that I understand decolonizing to be a doing, a thing of material consequence. In the United States, we are deeply imbricated in settler colonialism, a version of colonialism where the colonizers never leave. I myself am a settler living in the unceded land of the Kumeyaay people. My university is situated on a former military base and takes millions of dollars of funding from the Department of Defense and is thus imbricated in the imperial project of the United States. In this article, decolonization is not a metaphor. Authors Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang remind us that decolonization in the United States is about land, people, and the epistemology that exists between the two. They write that decolonization eliminates settler property rights and settler sovereignty. It requires the abolition of land as property and upholds the sovereignty of native land and people. This is a challenging but necessary directive, not a term to be applied towards all social justice movements. I see the body as a potential site of abolition of colonial structures, and embodiment as a means to access knowledges that have been suppressed or denied. Furthermore, neither transness or dance are easy providers of decolonization. An important critique of the term transgender is that, like the male-female framework before it, it universalizes the experience of white Western trans people to the exclusion and erasure of many forms of gender that exist globally. At the same time, individuals who cross, bend, ignore, fuck with, and play with gender are challenging the hold Western colonial norms that structure our bodies. And thinking in terms of decolonization, we are unsettling the body. Trans is not necessarily embodied either. Frameworks around gender transition invoke the idea that trans people are in the wrong body, but more recent frameworks articulate transition as movement, contradiction, ambiguity, and regeneration. Turning to dance, that's why we're all here. We're invested in decolonizing dance. We recognize the power that dance has to challenge and change power relations. I'm deeply honored to be here again. So thrilled to be learning with you all. At the same time, Western dance is haunted by the structure of ballet, the literal dance of empire. Much of the Western concert dance that I've experienced privileges a body that's thin, white, cis, able-bodied. On the other hand, narrowing the scope of dance to Western colonial practices is in itself a form of colonial violence. And so in this moment, I reveal the edges of my knowledge and humbly ask that I'm grateful to be able to broaden my horizons with you all. I want to suggest that dance is a potent embodied practice. Embodiment is repairing the cleft of mind from body, and it's a rejection of this fundamental ideal that mind and body are separate and that the mind must reign supreme. With embodiment, perception and experience are shared by the body. This is a unique epistemological approach where the body is seen as a source of knowledge. Dance is a practice that can cultivate this embodied knowledge and was hence suppressed time and time again. In dancing, decolonial epistemologies can surface from unsettled bodies. Okay, I have 1 minute left, but I'm going to quickly say why should we think trans and dance together? I guess the whole point. I am not referring to dance performed by trans people or made by trans choreographers, but instead I want to think about trans and dance as embodied practices, as technologies of the body. Both are concerned with gesture, with the laboring body, and are guided by choreography. And in readings in the field of transgender studies and queer studies, I find that scholars often reach for dance metaphors. I will skip reading them for now. I also suggest that both dance and trans provide a rupture in the hegemonic structures to an embodied and decolonial end. Both can unsettle the body. In order to abolish a settler colonial state, we can begin by abolishing its control over the body. Dancing and transing are both reparative means of navigating the body, a way of positioning the body as a source of knowledge rather than a tool or something extraneous. I wonder what lies at the intersection of dance and trans, and what are we able to see when we think them together? Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ava. That was amazing. And like so quick, but so eloquently said. Yeah, I think I'd like to start by opening the floor up to any questions based off the last two sort of lightning talks that we had. You can raise your hand or you can type in the chat.
I'm just going to jump in quickly here. because you probably won't hear too much from me today overall, managing all the technology stuff. But I found an amazing connection between both of the talks, particularly on this kind of like idea of binary violence on the body, and like how binaryism both implicitly and explicitly engages on the body in violent and aggressive ways that either make us feel bad about ourselves in spaces or make us feel unsafe with ourselves in certain spaces. I like my mother, am a solutions-oriented person, and always want to like think of like, how do we fix this for like the next generation? How do we like engage in this or engage in solution to the next generation? And I can never think of like answers that are not overly complicated or engage in like wide-ranging societal change that takes generations and generations. But I wonder if there are I guess kind of like questions or ideas of potentials for our movement work to engage in this. I know that both of y'all are talking in like the performative space, but I guess I want to see your outlook on how our performative works can help shift that idea. I feel like it's a big psychological question, but
Marita, go first, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your question. I think what's so powerful about people who think about their bodies, people who spend time thinking about the bodies, is they come eventually to understand that our bodies are curated in a way that is conditioned due to many systems depending on different things, right? So in a way, the work we do is attempt to divorce these things and understand how our bodies created condition and how you break out from them and create processes that allow bodies to be shaped and eventually movements, and then these movements will become repeated and then they will become a valid gender expression, right? So when I think about our projects that are linked in so many ways, I think about Sarah Ahmed's conceptualization of this idea of discomfort and this idea of what it means for specific bodies to shrink so that other bodies expand in spaces and the space becomes organized in a way that specific bodies are able to move freer than other bodies who have this ability to expand. And so thinking about solutions is such a difficult way. I think what I would rather think about is processes that are developed by individuals in order to attempt first at thinking about what it means for a body to be decolonized, what it means to decolonize, what are the processes in order to start thinking about localizing and understanding this way of moving. Yeah.
Sorry, can I add? Is there time? I love that Marita also brought up localizing, because as we were thinking about our project and also writing the abstract for this conference, we realized we do need to think about decolonization as a local process, because each of us experience it differently, and each of us have experienced different types of colonizations historically and also through our bodies. So I think so much of our thinking also really is centered on our context so that we can do justice to our experiences as well, and then hopefully understand through that process how we could engage other people and other people's experiences in our performance. And I think just another thing I wanted to add is that this project was born because Anna saw that there was a vagina museum, and on the Vagina Museum website, it said that they created a vagina museum because there was a penis museum and no vagina museum. And in that thinking in itself, we see a binary. And I think this project is also like really deeply trying to question, why is it constructed this way? Yeah.
Thank you, Anisha. Should we continue? I know, Sika, you had a question. If you'd like to put it in the chat. Okay.
Sorry, can I add something?
Just go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what my colleague said before, that I see not a solution, but a process that is a continuous reflection and triggering other people's reflection. Because sometimes we create our own bubbles, like here, this space is amazing because not all congress open the space to talk about queerness and transition processes and all the way we are doing today. But if we stay like in our own bubble, just reflecting on our own experiences, we won't have like a bigger impact maybe. So for me, it's like a continuous process of thinking, how can I bring more people to the conversation, and people with different experiences, of people who are very far from our way of thinking and looking at life, which is very challenging. And it's also hard, and sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes it's like unfair for us like to keep, I don't know if educating, but promoting these spaces of conversation, especially I think with our families and yeah, close circles.
Hey, I'd love to ask a question of my co-panelists. I was really excited by your presentation because I think there's a lot of like exciting work being done to engage the body in this like novel way, in this way that is like, I think been not happened in the past. And so I'm excited because I see you guys like grappling with these questions that I'm also grappling with. So it's cool. I guess I was wondering about thinking cyclically and the way that I think is in and of itself a decolonial practice. And like Anna, you just spoke about process as like being crucial, like process and like transition being crucial to the work that you guys do. So I'm wondering, yeah, if you were able to speak a little bit about thinking cyclically and maybe that how that has been part of your decolonial practice.
I mean, can I jump in? It's such a difficult question because I think also thinking cyclically while we were thinking about it was interpreted in different ways. So I could just talk about my own interpretation of it. As a Kathak dancer, my first reaction once I started realizing why I'm so uncomfortable with this space was to move away from it. And in that in itself, I just was like, okay, if I can't be here, I'll be away. And then I started a process of like negotiating how I could exist within that space and where I could dance and with whom. And in a sense, thinking about my body in that way and thinking about how I would like to move in that way seems like a cyclical process to me, just within that space. And that space being like my primary sort of association to dance started then allowing me to also think about other movements as ways in which I express myself. And that's kind of what I bring into this presentation or this project, because we have a difficulty thinking about movement as dancers of 3 different forms as well. Like our go-to methods of creating or our go-to methods of thinking seem to be so different sometimes. And in that, we haven't quite figured out what cyclical thinking for us could mean, because it really means like not crafting, we start here and we reach here, but rather emphasizing the process of making. And I think for me, like a part of it is experimentation, a part of it is time, and a part of it is looking at these things that are similar for all of us and what we can tether to as a group. And so much of our, so like thinking about the impact of sound on our body and discomfort came from a kind of cyclical thinking, I would say. I'm not sure exactly how to answer your question, but that's really what came to mind. Sorry.
Thank you so much.